Hi, kindergarteners. Today we're going to do lesson 2 from our listening and learning lessons all about colonial towns and townspeople. Lesson 2 is called A Trip to Town. Imagine you lived in the country long ago and were preparing to visit the nearest town. A trip to town was not an everyday event. 300 years ago, there were no cars or trains. Your parents would have taken you by horse and wagon, and the going was slow because you wouldn't have wanted to leave your animals alone or your crops uncared for at home for a very long time. Trips to town were pretty rare. Why might you have needed to go to town? Normally, everyone in your family helped to make most of what you needed on your farm. But there were always a few things that your family couldn't make themselves, like some iron nails or a new pair of shoes, or that would have simply taken too much time to make at home, like grinding wheat into flour or making cloth for a new shirt. Fortunately, there were different kinds of tradespeople in town who were specialists at many of these jobs that couldn't have been done at home or that took too long. So, why did farmers go to town? They would only go to town if there was something that they really needed that they couldn't create or find on their farm. Why were trips to town very rare? The trips were rare because the farmers couldn't leave their farm for a long time. The farmers take care of their crops and their animals every day. So if they're not at the farm, there would be no one to take care of the animals and the crops. So trips did not happen a lot. That's what rare means. How would you have paid these tradespeople for the things you needed? Farmers usually brought a load of goods to sell, or he might have bartered or exchanged some eggs or butter for the cloth you needed to make new clothes. If you bartered products that you brought from your farm, you swapped or traded what you brought for something you wanted from that tradesperson. You would not pay money, you would trade. You may have brought along some vegetables or even chickens to trade. The first stop on your trip to town, at least in a large town, most likely would have been at the town square. Most of the shops and important buildings were located in or around the town square. Unlike the country, buildings in town were close together, which made it possible for you to visit several shops on the same day. The town square was the place where the mayor and other town leaders made speeches or important announcements. The town square was also where townspeople met to talk or gossip with their friends. This was how people learned the latest news. So, what might a farmer bring with him when he's going to town? It would depend on what the farmer needed and what the farmer wanted to exchange. Back during this time, people didn't use money like we do today when we go to the store. Instead, they would trade. So they would go to a store and maybe they really need a chicken and they have some vegetables. They could go to the person who owns the chicken and say, I'll give you all of these vegetables for one chicken, please. And then they would trade the vegetables for the chicken. So a farmer could bring some goods from his farm, bring it to town, and then get the things he needed in exchange. From the town square, you probably headed to the nearby trading post or general store. This was where farmers could buy, sell, or trade all kinds of things. At the trading post or general store, you might have traded the vegetables, grains, or dairy products you brought with you for tools, cloth, or supplies that you needed. If you were visiting a typical town in colonial days, here is where your trip to town would end. Most smaller towns had only one general store. a place where farmers could trade their crops to get basic tools and supplies that they could not make at home. However, let us imagine that you were visiting a very large town where you could see and do so much more. If you looked near the river, you may have seen a mill, a building where wheat was ground between large stones to make large amounts of flour. Mills were almost always on the river because the flowing water was needed to turn the huge water wheel that made the large flat stones inside turn and grind the wheat. If you had visited the miller, no doubt you would have brought freshly harvested wheat or corn from your farm for the miller to grind into flour. Once it was ground into flour, you would have been able to take it home to bake bread, cakes, or other things to eat. Next, you may have stopped in the baker's shop and bought freshly baked rolls and bread. What a treat for your family. So, why would a farmer visit a mill? This is a mill in this picture. You see a big wheel and the water. Well, it would be really hard for a farmer all by themselves to turn their wheat or their corn into flour to create bread. So instead of doing it themselves, they would take it to the mill. The miller would ground up all of their wheat and then give them the flour to take with them. If you were a rich farmer, you may have visited the hatter for a new hat or the dressmaker to buy a new dress for your daughter. Instead of buying cloth, you may have just bought yourself a new shirt from the tailor. And you would have had to visit the all-important cobbler who would have made you a new pair of strong leather shoes. The blacksmith was an important specialist in town with his own set of tools and skills. The blacksmith built fires to melt iron so he could pound it into horseshoes and nails that you needed. He also worked hard to make many of the same metal tools that you would use back on your farm. In the busy town, each of these tradespeople and merchants had something special to offer people who lived in the country, just as you had much needed fresh food to offer them. For the next few days, you'll be learning more about some of these special people. So we just read about a lot of different trades and jobs that people had in colonial towns. We learned about the miller who could grind up the flour. We learned about the hatter who could make a hat, the dressmaker who could make dresses, a tailor who could make clothes and shirts, the cobbler who could make shoes, a blacksmith who could make tools and things out of metal. If you could have any job in a colonial town, which job would you want to do? Take some time to think about it. The next time we read together, we're going to read about people who made bread. Are you excited to find out how bread was made in colonial times? I think I'm pretty excited to find out. So I hope you join us for lesson 3 when we learn all about how people made bread. Bye.